Good afternoon. This is the October 11, 2024 meeting of the HB 737 Commission for the Study of Environmental and Health Impacts of Per and Polyfluorinated Chemicals. I'm Chris Bandasian chairing the meeting. The Commission does not have a quorum, but we will proceed as a non-official meeting. For our discussion, we don't have minutes and don't have a quorum for September 13 anyway. So why don't we begin, Mike Wimsatt, with your update?
Sure, be glad to do so. So good afternoon, everyone. So the DES update, we start off with the Air Resource Division. Nothing really new from them. As I reported last time, the company is likely to keep their emergency generators at the site that provide backup power for their fire suppression system. So our air division is working, those two will require a permit because they have air emissions. And so that we'll be working with the company on the permitting issue with respect to those generators. With regard to the facility closure, we talked about that last time. I don't really have anything new to report about that, other than that they're continuing to do their work. They still plan to complete their decommissioning and departure from the facility by the end of the calendar year. They did provide a written status update to us on September 12th. It was something we had requested when we went to visit there in August. That there will be a link to that in the notes for this meeting that will show you that, so you can look at that actual written status report that they gave to us. And of course, we'll continue communicating with them. We are very interested to learn whether they will plan to demolish or leave the facility standing. And they have said that they want to make that decision before the end of the year. So we'll keep you posted on that. As far as our waste division update, as far as POET systems installations goes, and as you know, if you ever look at the notes, I usually provide a lot more background information just to give context. It's things that I've talked about before, but I'll focus my spoken remarks here on the new information. As of October 2nd, just about a week ago, 663 POET systems have been installed, and they, of course, have to confirm that those are all working properly. And so far, about 650 of those systems are considered complete. They've confirmed that they're treating to the standard, and those are complete. So that's going well. If we go to the water line connections, so they're proceeding with design and construction work associated with water line installations in the towns of Litchfield, Bedford, and Merrimack. These areas, again, with existing water lines where homes require connections to the water main that's already in the street, and areas where new water mains need to be installed. Construction associated with the Hillcrest Road water main extension area of Litchfield has been underway since last October, and all water mains for this project have been installed and tested. Water meter installations began in April of this year, and 51 residences have been disconnected from their water supply well and are now receiving water provided by the water utility. Connection of water services are expected to be completed by the end of this month. The water utility has indicated that 32 properties have declined connection to the water line. 14 of those have opted to have a line extended to the curb and a curb stop installed in front of their home, but not to actually connect to the house plumbing. And then 10 residences did not respond to notices by both the water utility and from DES. And 8 residences provided a response indicating that they declined connection to municipal water. And the water utility will install curb stops in the street at all 18 of those locations. The company's completed the design for service connections to existing water mains in the towns of Bedford and Londonderry. Service application requests have been sent to 32 eligible properties, and that's right. And completed applications have been received for 29 locations. The water utility indicated that the contractor completed property inspections in early August and started connections during the week of August 19th. the water utility reported that significant bedrock, also known as ledge, was encountered on Kimball Road. The stop to end has been installed at 7 locations, and the meter installations are expected to begin this month and continue through November. The company's consultant has finalized design packages for extensions and connections to existing water mains for the Merrimack, Wildcat, Brenda Lane service connections. Service application requests have been provided to all eligible properties. Work associated with the water main extension on Brenda, John, and Edward Lanes started on October 3rd. The contractors estimated that the water main installation will be completed this calendar year, and that connections to the water main will extend into 2025. Connections to existing water mains in Merrimack and Bedford began in July. The contractors installed the service line from the stop to the end at 19 locations, and a total of 7 properties haven't responded to application requests for those areas. And the company is working with the water utility and the town of Londonderry to evaluate the feasibility of water line extensions in Londonderry. Conceptual design was completed by the water utility on behalf of St. Gobain in spring of 23. DES has met with the company, the town of Londonderry, and the water utility on multiple occasions to discuss the expanded water service in this area. Londonderry, meanwhile, has been approved by the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Commission, Trust Fund Advisory Commission, for an $8 million grant to supplement the town's and St. Gobain's contributions to the larger project. Negotiations between the town and St. Gobain continue. And there is some ARPA money that Londonderry is using to extend. They're working to get a design for extension of water main to 2 specific developments, and then to go connect up into High Range Road in anticipation that St. Gobain would be bringing a water line down High Range Road from the north to serve a number of neighborhoods to the west of High Range Road. So there's a lot of moving parts there right now. Still hasn't all been reconciled, but things are advancing. But there's still a need for the company and the town to come to an agreement on, how they might collaborate on that work and what contribution to that work St. Gobain would be making. So on April 6th of this year, DES, or actually April 6th of last year, DES received a letter from the company that proposed to delay submittal of an application for groundwater management permit until completion of a second set of PFAS samples from all the drinking water wells at the site. We concurred that a confirmation sample for all those wells would assist in delineating the boundary of the groundwater management zone and developing the long-term monitoring plan that's required under the permit. DES issued an approval letter back in May of 23, and requested that the application for the groundwater management permit be submitted by May 3rd of 24 of this year. St. Gobain and DES met to discuss that application on May 7th. And based on the outcome of that meeting, it was determined that the company would not submit an application in June of 24 as was originally anticipated. They proposed to conduct a long-term monitoring of drinking water wells under a work plan. And the work plan outline was received in June. We provided approval with comment on July 30th of this year. And on September 27th, they submitted a groundwater management zone work plan. And we're currently reviewing that work plan, and we'll provide comment before the end of this month. We've been periodically receiving updated proposals from the company to remedy additional water supply wells within the consent decree area following the initial agreements in April and June of 22. And that we're now up to term sheet attachment 21, when there will be a link to that in the notes, which was received and reviewed by DES in September. That attachment includes an updated list of remedies for all properties since the April 22 proposal. DES anticipates that a new proposal will be submitted in November to augment that. And then with regard to water supply sampling, again, we're at 18 addenda to that water supply sampling plan. Their consultant has been collecting a second set of samples from all wells previously sampled only once. And that exhibited results from below the detection limit to 10 nanograms per liter, 10 parts per trillion. And as of September 24th, second samples have been collected from approximately 1,180 properties, which represents about 95% of the properties that have been targeted for resampling. Laboratory analytical results for the second samples from properties that exhibited results from below detection to 10 parts per trillion have indicated that between 5 and 10% of these resampled properties have exhibited exceedance of the drinking water standard. These properties have been issued bottled water eligibility letters. And then if we go to previously unsampled wells within the CD area, DES has been conducting sampling at the remaining homes within the outer boundary of the consent decree that the company has not yet offered to sample. The sampling effort was initiated in March of this year, and as of October 8th, approximately 83 residences have been either sampled or scheduled to be sampled. Results have been received for samples collected from 79 properties, and of the results received, approximately 10% of the properties have exhibited an exceedance of the current ambient groundwater quality standard, and 70% exceed the newly promulgated EPA maximum contaminant level. Approximately 67 property owners have not responded to the sample invitation, and 1 has declined sampling. We've made 3 separate mail notifications. We don't plan to send out additional mailers, but we'll continue sampling properties whenever requests are received. And then if we go to sort of the statistics for sampling, and that's updated to reflect what's been done on Addendum 18, the most recent addendum. 3,867 properties identified for sampling. That's not a change from last month. 3,855 access agreements have been sent with a return rate of about 72%, and that's an increase of 2% over what I've reported previously. 2,568 samples have been collected from water supply wells. That's 5 more than the August report. And 1,180 second samples have been collected from water supply wells. And that includes about 1,007 samples collected since June of 23. And then 1,154 properties have been offered bottled water. And that's 3 more than the August report. And on to the remedial action plan. So we discussed this at some length before. A remedial action plan was submitted to DES on May 5th of 2023. We met with the company and their consultant in June of 2023. And as a result of that meeting, they decided to submit a RAP addendum following the discussions. DES met with the company and their representatives in December of last year to discuss the contents of the RAP addendum, which was submitted back on February 9th and of 2024. Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. So we met in December to discuss it. They gave us a presentation on what they were planning to submit. They didn't actually submit it to us until February of this year. But based on that presentation, we thought it was going to definitely fall short of what we were expecting. So DES provided comment on the RAP and the RAP addendum on October 10th. So just yesterday, we have finally got our formal letter out. So that letter, there'll be a link to that in the notes for this meeting. And I can tell you that it pretty clearly states that the RAP and the RAP addendum continue to fall far short of what we were expecting for the site. So you'll be able to see the text of that. There'll be a link to it in the notes for this meeting. And then we've requested as part of that resubmittal of the RAP within 90 days. So basically 90 days from yesterday's letter, we would expect to get a new RAP. And there'll also be included with the notes the statistics related to POET installations and waterline installations. Nearly all the proposed POET installations are at least 84 or 85% or greater completion in each of the towns. Of course, the waterline connections are further behind that. They're pretty advanced in Litchfield, but in all the other towns, Merrimack, Londonderry, and Bedford, for the ones that are still pending, we've still got a long ways to go to get those done. The relative number in Merrimack and Bedford is fairly small, but the number in Londonderry is large. It's between 200 and 300. So, and that really is going to hinge on getting that agreement and getting a design going for those connections in the neighborhoods west of High Range Road in Londonderry. And that's what I got, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Questions for Mike? Gary?
Is there anything that strikes your eye or concern about the transition or the timing of any of these? It sort of sounds like everything's on schedule, going as planned, shall we say? But from your perspective, is there anything that we should be aware of that you're sort of concerned about?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think in terms of providing alternate water, you know, the project in Londonderry is the big project that's still out there and isn't really booked yet. Everything else I've talked to you about is just, you know, the design's there, the contracts have been let, and they're just in process of, you know, constructing water lines and making connections. But Londonderry is not settled yet. And so that, you know, we're really hoping to get that kind of closed up and have a plan for getting. It's going to take time to design and construct that, but at this and we understand that, but at this point that has not been sort of formalized yet. So that's, I guess, what our main concern is. And then we've had a concern all along about the remedial action plan being deficient for the actual site proper and getting that and the groundwater management permit. So those are still issues that are absolutely outstanding and need to get reconciled.
Thank you.
Mindy? Go ahead.
I have three sets of questions, three different parts of this. You made a distinction between the fact that, you know, they were initially supposed to submit a GMP and then it was decided they would submit a work plan. And I just wanted to know how that decision was made and why. And so what's the barrier? I mean, I understand that they need to fully understand the scope of the problem, but you made that distinction. I just wanted to know why you made that distinction, what you said.
Well, I think what we were getting from them for proposed, what we expected to see from them for a groundwater management permit was likely going to be quite deficient. And we, when we have discussed that, their feeling is, and we don't necessarily disagree with it, that there's additional information that can be collected and probably should be collected that will help to inform a more robust and what we think will be an appropriate groundwater management permit. And it has to be acknowledged that, you know, this is a very unique site, and, you know, groundwater management permits are usually not all that complicated because we have a fixed area, usually, certainly compared to this site, a much more limited geographic area, and we know which, you know, where we want to have wells to monitor the progress of cleanup, and we know where, if any, residential wells we want monitored to make sure that you know, the plume isn't expanding and such. That we can't say that in this case, right? It's a much different site, so there's still a lot to be sorted out about what that's going to look like. But I guess probably the best way to describe it is our vision for what will be an acceptable groundwater management permit for this site is quite a lot more expansive than what the company is envisioning. So they have agreed to do some additional work to inform, you know, getting towards what we hope will be a groundwater management permit and really a monitoring plan that will be more expansive and really accomplish the goals of what a permit is intended to accomplish.
Okay. And the second question was around the RAP and then the comment letter. I was hoping you could give just like a really quick summary of what you see or the agency sees as deficiencies. But I'm struck by the fact that I'm hearing like this deficiency, slow work. And my third question was around what's taken so long to get these water samples collected? Because the 5 samples more than in August is literally not even a full day of sampling. So every single month it's like a drip of samples right now, and they should be done.
Yeah,
And
well,
I don't understand what the problem with this, like, work plan, they were supposed to submit a GMP, they're deficient on the RAP, they're not, it's like, I'm seeing a lot of pattern here that, especially with them leaving the state, makes me concerned.
So your third question is a little easier. So the seemingly slow additional samples is the samples that requests for sampling that have come in that they need to accomplish. Those are coming in and they're doing them. That's why those are a relatively small number. Where we've had more sampling that needed to be done, they didn't agree to do that sampling, right? So that's really the concern about that. But with regard to your second question, I think the best way to describe the RAP, the problem with the RAP, is really very simple, is that their initial RAP and the RAP addendum basically took the position that, well, the groundwater and the soil are really contaminated here, and even if we do something really robust by way of a remedy, we're not likely to meet ambient groundwater quality standards anytime soon or at all. Therefore, we're not going to do anything. I mean, basically, they wanted to monitor natural attenuation, which is absolutely unacceptable to the agency. And as I think I discussed it at last month's meeting of this group, we have lots of examples of sites that are quite contaminated where even a robust active remedy will not necessarily result in restoration of groundwater quality meeting standards in a shorter period of time, or even a long period of time. That doesn't mean that you get a pass and you don't have to do anything. So our feeling is that there are lots of things that could be done at this site that would help to substantially reduce the concentrations of contamination, potentially both in soil and in groundwater. And we expect to see those components as part of a proposed RAP. So that's, the RAP comment letter does a more elegant and eloquent job than I just did of saying that. But that's essentially the message, is that you can't use an argument that, wow, it's really contaminated and no matter what we do, we're not going to meet standards, so we don't really have to do anything. We're not accepting that argument, and we're going to be looking for something much more robust than what they proposed to date.
So I guess my questions all are circling around this issue of a non-compliant approach that Saint-Gobain has taken in terms of requirements for GMP, requirements for a RAP. I mean, they just keep submitting things that are not appropriate for both of those. And then, the fact that they're leaving, and I just, wonder what the tools are that you have at hand instead of this. I mean, this has been dragging out for, years now. So what do you think are you feeling that you have the tools from a regulatory perspective that you need right now to enforce the compliance on this? They're obviously reticent. And so do you have the tools you need to be able to enforce the law with them, or to hold them accountable is my question.
Sure, we have options available to us, and as you know, it's not something that would be appropriate for me to discuss in a meeting like this. But yeah, we certainly are aware that we have options available to the agency to compel compliance.
Okay.
Don first, then Rosemary.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Glad to hear that the reply on the RAP is moving forward. I was kind of asking about that, so thanks for bringing that to our attention. You had mentioned earlier on that some private homes have refused connections that Saint-Gobain was basically willing or required to install. I guess my question is, what happens in the future under different homeowners? Is this a one and done situation, or do they have an opportunity in the future to come back if the real estate transfers and someone else, purchases the property, or they change their mind? Is it a one and done thing, or does this kind of go on in perpetuity? Is there always an ability to get that water line installed in the future?
That's a good question, Don. So from the perspective that the agency's role in, using state law to require a responsible party to provide a remedy, And this came up early on in Litchfield. Our first water line installations for this case were in Litchfield, about 400 of them. And we did have a handful of property owners who elected not to connect. And we had to make a decision at that point how that was going to be handled. And the way we handled it, and the way we continue to handle this, is that if you were offered a remedy from a responsible party, and you have adequate notice and you're aware of it, and you make a heads up decision to decline it, then you don't get another bite at the apple. That's just the way it works. So, and we ended up, making a lot of communications to particularly the homeowners in Litchfield back then to say you have to by a certain date, because their contractors were in the field, they were doing the work, they're ready to come into these homes and make connections, and said if you don't give us an answer, a yes answer by a certain date, then you're not going to be entitled to this in the future. And so that's the way it's worked. Yeah. Now that's with respect to the state's actions here. So if I understand your question entirely. So if a homeowner now says, no, I don't want to connect, I want to keep my well, and then 5 years down the line, they sell their home, and the new homeowner says, well, I'd really like to be connected to town water. They, nothing that the state has done would have eliminated the ability of that homeowner to take their own action. So they could approach the company themselves and request a remedy. But the DES is not going to be in a position to compel the company to implement a remedy there.
Yeah, and that's what I thought was the case. I think you had mentioned in the past that there are some properties that would actually proceed with the water line installation right through the foundation into the home and just not necessarily connect the line. Is that an option too? Like if they actually have the line underground constructed up to the home?
I understand what you're saying. Just do everything except an actual connection. Right. So I don't honestly know if that happened, to be honest. I'm really not sure about that. There may be some discomfort on the part of the water utility to have something like that all the way into a home without
the final plumbing connection.
Without the final plumbing. So I can ask. Andy would probably know, but I don't recall if that happened or not. I can't think of an instance where that happened. The more common case is the person says, okay, we'll get a curb stop. And then if in the future, if we or a subsequent homeowner decides they want to be connected, then, there's an expense there because you got to run line, you may have to go through landscaping and such, but at least there's an ability to, just like with any property that if you buy a lot and there's a water line out front, when you build a house, you tie into the curb stop and then you do your thing. So, that's the typical situation. And that's what the utilities have elected to do, because it's a whole lot easier, right? If you don't have a curb stop there, then you got to dig up the street and put one in.
Right. So I think you said that though, is they're actually putting curb stops into the houses, even though they don't want the rest of the line to the house.
Oh yeah, the curb stops are being installed, but even if the homeowner doesn't want a connection, they'll still put a curb stop at that property.
Okay.
That way, it's not a $0 option, but it's a lot cheaper and easier if in the future a homeowner, a new owner wants to get connected. It's much easier to do that.
I thought I did remember, maybe it wasn't you, but I thought it was about the situation where I did say about having the line brought physically up to the home or into the home, but not physically connected to the plumbing, so the well stays in service. I mean, that even someone who doesn't want to, I'm sure there are people out there that just don't want a water bill, and they don't realize that they're drinking contaminated water from their well, but still, I don't understand someone who would refuse that, because that's going to just devalue the property when they go to sell it. And potentially the new homeowner is going to say, well, now I got to spend $15,000 running my own water line to get rid of the well. And, but that's a mentality that you can't correct in some cases.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's some people who feel like a well is free, right? They feel like there's $0 associated, and those people apparently have never had to put treatment on their well or replace a pump, because of course those of us with water systems know that with our own wells know that they're not free. They're just, the costs are different and they go to different places, but there's still a cost associated with it. It's not a huge number, but they're out there, and it's to be expected. We're providing alternate water remedies to thousands of people. There's going to be some people that elect not to participate.
Yeah, and you had mentioned, did you say something about negotiation with Londonderry and Saint-Gobain? Is that what you mentioned earlier today?
Right.
And is that for what, extending water mains?
Yeah, that so basically there are and the numbers I'm going to get it wrong, but it's in the order of magnitude. There's around maybe 450 wells in Londonderry that are west of High Range Road, which is the outer boundary demarcation, that are above standards, and about half of those Londonderry has proposed to put in POETs and has been doing that, and the other half they propose to extend a water line. And that's basically in sort of general geographic terms, it's the northern portion of High Range Road in Londonderry and the neighborhoods west of that northern portion of High Range Road. And that has been the subject of protracted, slow-moving discussions between the town and the company. And the reason is that the town recognized that it represented an opportunity not just to get those folks provided with alternate water who were in the consent decree area, but to also get a more extensive water line network in the town, much of which doesn't have public water, and also to provide an opportunity to provide connections to public water to neighborhoods and properties east of High Range Road, which is outside the consent decree area. So there's a lot of moving parts there. The town has sought funding and has obtained funding from a number of sources, and has voted to actually at town meeting a couple of years ago to authorize the town to enter into a loan agreement for a loan from the state's programs. So all that money cobbled together would allow them to make significant improvements. And so that if you think about the northern part of High Range Road being provided with a water main connected to Manchester Waterworks as the supplier, and then providing water lines and connections to those homes in those communities or neighborhoods west of High Range Road. If you think about that as the Saint-Gobain project, and then Londonderry coming in from the south to kind of create a loop that connects existing water lines, water mains in Londonderry to that, and then providing an opportunity to connect a whole bunch more properties in Londonderry with public water, then that's what they've been working on. That's the reason for the delays. They've been trying to figure out how the cost for that gets shared, how, what is a fair portion of that project for Saint-Gobain to be funding, and what is appropriate and capable and possible for Londonderry to fund. So it's just, those things always take longer than we'd like, and that's still in the works, but we're hopeful that that's going to get reconciled in the coming months, and that they can proceed to design and then get construction started on that.
Good. I appreciate that explanation, because looking back at all the towns that were involved in this, and I wasn't aware that any single town had ever did their own negotiation with Saint-Gobain. I know, your department has always been heavily involved in negotiation on behalf of just all the private well owners. So this seems like a little distinction, a little different in Londonderry, and I think that helps explain why.
I think in part it's different because Londonderry doesn't have a water system, right? Pennachuck has a franchise and has some water lines in Londonderry, but no water system. And if Londonderry had not been interested in doing a larger project, then likely the agency could have, probably moved this much more quickly, because we know what they're responsible for under the consent decree, and they know that, and they proposed a remedy, and they could have gone to design and maybe even been constructing by now. But I think that because the town, good on them, wanted to do something more ambitious, often you get punished for being more ambitious by having to spend more time at it. So that's what's happened.
Well, that's good, because I was hoping it wasn't a situation where they had just, refused any assistance on DES's part and wanted to go for it alone on their own. It's probably not a good decision, and coming from my experience with MVD, I certainly would caution them not to go that route. But just the one last question real quick is, where do the soil standards stand for PFAS?
Yeah, good question. So that's our rulemaking that is currently in process for ENV OR 600 is the moniker for that. And we, of course, as you know, went to a public comment on that and received significant public comment. We're working on reviewing that, and it's our hope to make whatever appropriate changes might be indicated by public comment, and then file a final proposal with the Office of Legislative Services sometime in November.
Okay, so maybe November. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thanks, Mike. I want to follow up on a comment that Mindy asked, or question she asked you regarding the enforcement tools that DS has at its disposal. When do those enforcement tools get triggered? Like, where does Saint-Gobain have to go as far as their level of uncooperation or delay before DES maybe triggers an enforcement action, which I'm thinking probably goes all the way to Superior Court?
If you're asking, well, I mean, in terms of in a broad abstract sense, the enforcement options that the agency has available to it under the statutes include issuance of an administrative order, entering into an administrative order by consent, if one can be obtained, or we also have the authority to seek injunctive relief or penalties, civil penalties under, and that would typically go through, you're right, the Superior Court process. So as far as, what moves us from trying to work cooperatively with a party to, taking a more forceful approach, that is something that is specific to each individual case, and there's a lot of things that go into making that decision. And it's terribly unsatisfying for all of you, but I'm not going to discuss that specific to this case for obvious reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Tanya, I think you're muted, maybe.
I'm sorry, Tanya, we still can't hear you.
I
Oh,
apologize. Here I am.
there we go.
Thank you for taking my question. Hopefully it ties back to what Don was talking about. And I know there's an additional water pumping station that is being looked at for the extension down into Salem for the Southern Pipeline. Do you know anything about that additional pipeline or the additional pumping station that needs to be built in Derry? And does that fall into any of this?
There are folks here who are working on that. I don't believe it's related to this case. And I apologize, I don't know the details of where that's at there, but I will tell you that, the first phase of the Southern New Hampshire Water and Connection Project actually kind of just experienced a milestone today, and that is that the water, if there was a need to put in a 30-inch water main, I got this, I'm trying to remember the name of the street now. There's some water tanks, gosh, I can't remember the street, but basically south of Route 28 that that provide adequate pressure for the Manchester system. And I think it was around, it's probably less than a mile, but it was at least something approaching a mile of water main that needed to be upsized to 30 inches so that water wheeling from Manchester through Derry down into the Southern New Hampshire project would provide, there would be adequate pressure when Derry was wheeling that water to the south. That main line just recently came online. It's not 100% done because there's still some road repairs and things like that that need to be done. That'll be done in the spring. But the main thing is that is the last piece of the phase 1 of the Southern New Hampshire interconnection project that has now been completed and is in service. There is work going on to evaluate a second phase of the project, which would significantly increase the available daily water available through the Southern New Hampshire connection project that is still looking to be funded and designed and constructed. But if you want to reach out to me, I can put you in touch with Mike Unger, who is our engineer in the water division, who's the most familiar with the daily work going on this. I'd be happy to connect you with him so he could answer your question better than I did.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Other questions? Nancy?
Thanks, Chris. Mike, just another question, and I was just thinking of, for those residents who may choose not, those private homeowners that may have choose for whatever reason not to take advantage of this opportunity now to hook up. Was there a way that in that agreement that this opportunity could have been like tied to the title, so that, I mean, because I just see it as St. Gobain gets away with not having to do what they really should be doing. I know it's based on a homeowner's choice, but it might not be the next homeowner's choice, and the problem's still there. So I just wondered, was that a consideration, or like tying it to the title so that the responsible party would be responsible no matter at what point?
Well, no, I don't know that there was work done. I mean, I think at some level is a question of fairness. We have a responsible party here who is, for the purposes of that particular property, has done what it needed to do and offered to provide a full remedy as required under the law. And then you got a property owner that doesn't want it. And so I think that as a practical matter, that is just how we needed to deal with it at the state level. But again, a new owner could absolutely go in and take an action on their own to get a remedy. But it's not something that because as you can imagine, we're looking to get a property owner to do what it's required to do under the law. And then if they do that, and then we say, well, that's not, they don't want it right now, but we're going to hold you up forever on this. It's kind of it's not really a fair way to approach it. So that's the way that it was done. Again, a new property owner coming in, purchasing the property would absolutely, we've done nothing. The state hasn't done anything to infringe on their individual rights to take an action against the company if they saw.
So there's nothing that they could use and just say, well, I'm just thinking, I get it. And they'd have the curb stop, you said, is going to be there, right?
Curb stop will be there, right?
Yeah. I just wish these people would think about that, that the long-term impacts of I don't see Don's face like, oh my goodness. I know. Okay. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
Other questions for Mike? I just have a little follow-up to that in terms of people who bring a line to the house and not connect. I know from when the first experience, at least in Bedford, was DES required decommissioning of the well when a connection was brought to the house. And I think some people asked about whether they could continue to use their wells for irrigation, and there was some softening of that. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, we did find, when we were first doing the project, particularly in Litchfield, and understand Litchfield was a town that really didn't have any public water there. And all these people had, that lived there, a lot of them had been in their homes for 30 or 40, 50 years, always had a well, never had a water bill. And all of a sudden, the government, as they saw it, was coming through, bringing in water and telling them they had to connect. And they didn't like that very much, some of them. And what we were finding is they said, well, that's great, but I don't mind paying for the water that I drink and for the toilets and things like that, but I don't really want to pay for irrigation water because that's more expensive. And so from a pure usage standpoint, we really would have preferred that all those people decommission their wells because we knew they were getting contaminated water when they pumped them. But we made it practical, really what amounted to a public health decision is we wanted as many people as possible to agree to connect and get safe water coming into the home. And we just really kind of determined, well, we know that there's significant contamination in this area. And if we have a whole mutiny of people getting connected, then we're going to bring this water system in here and it's not going to protect anybody. So we made a decision, practically speaking, that we would encourage them, but if they insisted, we would allow them to keep their well for non-potable irrigation purposes. And a number of people did that. Some people, I think, said, well, I don't really want to have a well like that on my property. And so they agreed to decommission. But at the end of the day, a lot of people did opt to keep their wells for irrigation. And it's not perfect, but I think, in the grand scheme of things, it did result in much higher success rate in getting people to agree to connect to public water.
I think that was a good decision, Mike, personally.
So different subject, Mike. Is there enough data on resampling after poets have been installed to maybe look at some of that data and see how that repeat sampling is coming out? Is it similar to other resampling? Are the systems effective in doing what we hope they would do?
Sure. My understanding is they are effective. I'm not personally familiar with the ins and outs of that, but I can check with Andy and find out, what we're not. There is a regular requirement to go back and monitor the performance of those systems. And that started, I think, at least 1 or 2 Julys ago. So I can touch base with Andy and maybe prepare some remarks on that for the next meeting, if that would be helpful.
That would be, I think, good to look at.
Sure.
Yeah. And the other question I have is, are there GIS coordinates for the sampling locations that are on the GIS map, the coordinates that are available to the general public?
I believe so. I think when you can click on it, you actually get coordinates when you click on one of those if you look for that. I think that's right. I can check on that as well. I'm not 100% sure.
We have an area that's more intensively developed, which is the sort of sand and gravel area between the Merrimack River and Back River Road, and then it changes into bedrock. But that's an area where we have fairly high PFOA levels and also intensive development, and the developers don't always seem to be able to find what are wells that are not in use but have been sampled. And sort of odd not knowing exactly where things are.
Okay.
So anyway,
I'll touch base with Andy, and what I may do is have Andy reach out to you directly, Chris.
that would be great. Thank you. Okay, if we don't have any other questions for Mike in the DES update, we'll move on to Leanne in the DHHS update. Go ahead,
right.
Leanne.
Good afternoon. So I have a couple of updates about the Merrimack cancer investigation. So Dartmouth and HHS continue to meet with the project's advisory boards. That includes a community advisory board and the scientific advisory board, as well as the project steering committee. The next community advisory board is scheduled for November 1st. The teams are continuing to work on analyzing the cancer data and kind of bringing the older cancer registry data into the new coding rules that the newer cancer registry data have been using. And there's been extensive work on that process. So the plan is to look at data from 1995 through 2021 and also look at some other factors. We anticipate being able to share preliminary results with the project's advisory boards and steering committee sometime during this next quarter. We've received feedback from the commission and community members regarding an interest in completing a similar analysis on other types of cancer data. So given that this analysis is beyond the scope of the current project with Dartmouth, we're discussing the feasibility of undertaking that request, with our current resources. And we hope to have something to report back to this committee in either our November or December meeting. The team completed the community engagement studios, and we are reviewing preliminary themes identified during the studios, and we're preparing a summary to share with the project's advisory boards and the steering committee. We talked about this last time, but the team is planning a survey with the UNH Survey Center to gauge interest in participating in a future research study and to be able to fill gaps about known risk factors. So the survey, it consists of approximately 40 questions, and the general topics include concerns about environmental issues and how they might impact health, risk factors for kidney cancer, such as smoking and exercise, health history, residential history, and willingness to take part in a larger study and engage in specific study activities like taking surveys, providing water samples, and blood samples. So the survey will be distributed to part of the Granite State Panel, and this is a group of approximately 8,500 residents in New Hampshire that have opted to participate in surveys that are regularly sent out by the UNH Survey Center. So typically when they send a survey out to this group, they see about a 20% return rate. So these are folks that are interested in doing surveys and have said, yes, please send me surveys. And so the Survey Center sends surveys out on a variety of topics. So the plan for the survey is that it will be statewide, but there's going to be a stronger emphasis in Merrimack and the surrounding communities. So what that's going to look like is a survey will be sent to all the registered panelists in Merrimack and the surrounding communities, and then to half of the panelists in the rest of the state to try to get that stronger, more responses from the Merrimack and surrounding communities. We had some feedback during the community engagement studios that it would be there's a need to provide information to residents about how they can get their water tested, and so we've been looking at incorporating that into the survey as well. So if someone takes a survey, they're interested in getting more information about private well testing, we're looking at how we could as a follow-up send them some additional information. This survey does have to go through an IRB review, and so that has been drafted, and we think it'll qualify for an expedited review. Just given the timing of the project and trying to stick to the project timeline of finishing the project by the end of June of next year, the survey does need to be sent out as soon as possible, and so they are hoping to send it out prior to the election to keep the timeline moving. Not an ideal time frame for sending out a survey, just given all of the other surveys that are going out around the election, but just in the interest of keeping the project moving forward, that they're hoping to send it out soon, within the next month. And again, these are folks that have opted to receive these surveys, so they're hoping to have a good response rate from that. Lastly, the online questionnaire to solicit feedback on community concerns is still up and posted on the website and will remain on the website throughout the study. So that's what I have about the cancer investigation. The other update that I have is that we have updated our New Hampshire specific clinicians guidance for PFAS, and this incorporates the updates that ATSDR published in January of this year, and it also includes the EPA's newly established MCLs. And I can put a link to that. I'll try to put a link to that in the chat. I'm not sure if I'm able to do that, but that is available, and we're looking at ways to distribute this information to clinicians. It's up on our website, but we're also talking about some other ways to get that information out. So that's what I have. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thanks.
Rosemary?
Thank you very much, Leanne. Regarding the consideration of doing other feasibility studies on other types of cancers. You said you'd have an update on that either November or December. Do you anticipate that that might require legislative action or appropriation? Because if so, you know, we have a period just at the beginning of November, I think the second, third week of November, to file legislation. So it would be good to know before then.
Okay.
If, you know, if that legislative remedy might be an option that DHHS would want to pursue in order to do those studies. But I'm glad that you're thinking of that, because I do think it's necessary.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring that back for us to
Okay.
consider.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Leanne? If not, Maureen, anything new legislatively?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday was veto day per our state constitution, part 2nd, article 44. The governor vetoed 10 House bills. As was mentioned last week, House Bill 1415, prime sponsored by Representative Murphy, was one of those bills. It's entitled An Act Relative to PFAS Facility Liability. The veto was overturned in the New Hampshire House, and it's a 2/3 margin that has to be attained in both houses. So that's a very high threshold. And the vote was in the House 289 to 38 to overturn. On the Senate side, again, 2/3, both bodies, it did not reach that threshold. 6 to 17 was the vote. I know Representative Murphy will want to discuss that more. I think.
In many ways, I would say enough said. I think that tells us a lot. But you know, I certainly will be back with legislation, because this is an accountability issue, and you know, Merrimack taxpayers and all the people that have been funding our $14.5 million fixes to you know, our own water system here. You know, we're paying enough. So I'm a full supporter of, if you make a mess, you clean it up and you pay for it. And this is one of those things that I think New Hampshire has to get serious about protecting public health. And this bill was one of the ways to do that. So unfortunate, but we don't give up.
Gary.
I've forgotten the numbers, but he vetoed one based on the fact that there's very much difference in threshold. Did that come into play, and did that somehow just slip through the cracks that the threshold was so different?
What you're saying is true. There was a discrepancy, a very significant discrepancy. The bill that I filed, 1415, was much more restrictive, and that higher threshold came about through amendments to another bill that happened after the fact. So it's, you know, what the governor said was true. There would have been a discrepancy, but one that certainly could have been fixed in the next couple of weeks with this legislation. So we were not successful. I'm sorry, Gary.
So potentially the fix could be relatively easy if we can just have a sit down with the new governor and just sort of make this reasonable.
We shall see. Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope.
Just want to also add, speaking of next year, I'll start the template for the 2025 legislative updates. And so if anybody has anything that they're filing, they'd like me to add to it now, I will be glad to do that and hopefully keep that going, assuming I'm on this commission for the next term. And then lastly, Representative Murphy and I were discussing, did she leave the call? I don't see her now, but anyway. We're discussing House Bill 1171, which extends the commission, and there's some changes there. So a little bit new in 2025. And so with
Sorry,
that,
I have some dogs that are gonna bark because I know my kids are getting the bus outside. So I was trying to spare the background noise. Yeah, it's just the HB 737 commission, which is this one, technically expires by law November 1st when we submit our annual report. But it changes. I just reestablished the commission with I mean there are really no changes other than something that was in law because of it was a DHHS reporting thing that was the only thing that was just updated. So the commission stays the same. The membership, you know, the numbers of members and everything, that all stays the same. It's just we'll have a new number. And what you said, it's HB 1171.
yes,
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Yeah.
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Maureen, realistically, or Rosemary, when do you think we would have Hudson members?
I spoke to Andy Renzullo a few weeks ago about that. He's leaving the House. He's retiring. He gave us a suggestion, which I think I might have updated this commission, to go through the, go through the Senate president and get nominations. So unfortunately, I haven't done that yet. I had a little bit of a delay through, I was injured in an accident. So but I'm on the back to recovery. So I will get to that, Maureen. We'll get the plan was we're going to send a letter to the Senate, Senator Carson, to make nominations. And Andy, I don't believe he gave me any names, but we'll send a letter requesting nominations from the town and then copying Senator Carson to pass those on to the Senate president for formal appointment.
I think the other thing we had talked about too, I know for this commission, I'm pretty sure, but another commission, maybe this one as well, that as elections are going to change everything, it really probably makes sense within just a few weeks for, I mean, none of us may be here if we're appointed, you know, as legislators. So all that's sort of up in the air. And I would imagine maybe after the election might be the best time to, because if there's a new Senate, we don't know who's going to be making the appointments. I don't know. I just think since we're so close to the deadline, the bill is being reestablished with a new commission number, that it might make sense to actually wait until we find out who is in those roles, because I've seen at times past, because I know I was on the cutting of one of those decision-making processes before, that somebody could get appointed and then whoever comes in and replace them from the Senate or the House could reappoint them. So I would hate to see somebody appointed for a couple of weeks and then that change. So to me, it makes sense to wait just till after the election and then whomever is in whatever roles according to the legislation that they could do it.
I have a question. On 1171, is the effective date November 1st? So there's no lag time between when this commission expires and the next one.
No.
Okay.
No.
Although I think it's worthwhile, Nancy, I am going to at least put out some feelers about interested people, because by the time it does get to the system, the election will be over.
So just to add to all of that, House Organization Day, thus the election of the Speaker after the general election in November, is December 4th.
Right.
Okay. So I am just thinking ahead to November 8th, which I had down as a next meeting date. And I don't know if it works the way it works in many other government bodies, where you remain a member until you're replaced. But, where we've finished our 5 years, is there an ability to have a November meeting? Or do we have to wait?
I don't see a problem with that.
I think if people just until they're replaced is my understanding, because the new members aren't sworn in till later. So I think we just leave it as it is, and everybody that's invested and, you know, is a member now, just continues until that time, that new, you know.
Yeah,
new
because
decision.
technically the new people don't take over until December the 4th.
Right,
So this, people function
Right.
as representative and senators until that time.
correct.
Yeah, and my understanding too is that we remain in place. The only thing that would change the appointments of the legislative representatives is the balance between the minority and the majority. So there may come a time, I know the first year of this commission, there was a Democratic majority. So I believe there were 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans that were serving in the state representative roles. And then that shifted when the Republican majority came in, where there were then 2 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and that's remained. So if there is a shift in that majority minority after the election, then we would see that change would then come. But otherwise, I believe we would keep our appointments, particularly the civilians on the commission. I don't imagine, unless they opted to resign and be replaced, I don't see where there would be a trigger that would replace them automatically. The only thing is we have these holes to fill with these town and citizen representatives that are vacant that we need to fill, but I don't believe that's dependent on the sunsetting of 737 and then 1171 coming on. But I hope we can still call it 737 because it's just too many numbers to remember. It's good just to stick with 737.
But it does sound a little too much like a Boeing aircraft. I never liked that.
Yeah. That will be the 737 MAX, right? I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
Okay, well, unless there's anything else, I will hopefully have a draft of the report out to you all next week, and we can proceed from there. Okay? All right, thank you, everyone. It's been a good year of accomplishment and a good 5 years, really, but a lot of work left to be done. So thank you, everyone, and have a pleasant holiday weekend.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.